So what is it that's causing people to be less and less reliant on religion, to think that religion matters less and less every year? Well, it all comes down to autonomy. Think about it. If you are somebody who thinks that you don't need, you're self-reliant, you don't need anyone else, then why would you ever think that religion matters anymore? Remember, religions, all religions make claims from antiquity, ancient claims, transcendent claims, that they expect people who believe these things to submit your view for the authority of the religious view. Let's face it, you might say, well, I didn't believe that until I became a Christian, or I didn't believe that until I became a Buddhist, or I didn't believe that until I became a Muslim. And at some point, I was enlightened in this area, and I submitted my view to the view of Christianity, Buddhism, or Islam. Right? This is what religious claims do. They require our submission. Well, if we are growing in our autonomy, and I think we are, I'll show you two ways we are, then I would expect us to want to be involved, or to think that religious views that require our submission are going to matter, because they're not going to matter if we are entirely, or see ourselves as entirely self-reliant. And one of the first ways that we do this is with the growth and the rise of informational autonomy. We are in the information age. This growth, by the way, is seen subtly in the Gallup survey. Here's what I mean. When they are surveying people over 50 years, right? Actually 70 years, the survey goes. So if you look at that period of time, you will see that it's for the most part declining, the number of people who say that religion matters. But there are some bumps in which, for a couple of years, people said, no, religion matters. Well, what happened? Well, one of those bumps, for example, takes place after 9/11. 9/11 occurs, and suddenly people are thinking religion matters again. So the survey kind of shows this, and when it talks about statistical growth, it's really just trying to explain why the decline is not steady. It's got this one peak in it. Well, they're just trying to explain that away, and it gives us some insight as to what might be causing the decline. Let's take a look at the survey again. The survey says that there was an observable jump in religious interest following 9/11. The poll recorded this jump at the time when it was being done year to year. It was being recorded because 64% at that time said religion was very important to them following the attacks, compared to 52% who said that in 1978. So look, it had already dropped to 52% by 1978, but 2001, it's suddenly back up 12 points. What's the deal with that? Why is it all of a sudden important to people again? Well, you know why that's the case. It's because with people, and by the way, you can see this in different studies. Not forget about Gallup for a second. You can see this just in articles and stuff that was done after 9/11. So for example, this website I'm linking to from Duke actually explains it, this short-lived rush to church. This short-lived rush to church. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, it's short-lived. Oh yeah, it was short-lived. That's important for us to recognize. Now, why did it happen at all? Well, because after 9/11, I think a lot of people felt very vulnerable, and like maybe all the progress of culture, the progress and evolution of smart human beings over time wasn't erasing all difficulties on planet Earth. And suddenly people were searching for answers. Like, what do we do about this? And they felt much less self-reliant in the weeks following 9/11. Like, you didn't know, I don't know if you remember at the time, there were like threats on the West Coast, or where's it going to happen again? It's just the beginning of a number of attacks, and suddenly it felt like we were no longer in control of our environment. We no longer had the safeguards we thought we had in place, and suddenly we all felt very vulnerable. We felt less autonomous. Now, when surveyed about this, the Duke study, for example, says there were reasons why people rushed to church after 9/11. Here's one of the reasons they posted. The houses of worship were jammed with parishioners seeking refuge, community, and a place to grieve. But I think there's actually something else they were seeking. They were seeking information. They were seeking answers. They weren't seeking those answers before. 9/11 triggered their search for answers. Now, what happened, of course, is that very, very shortly after 9/11, this is not like it started a revival. It wasn't long before outlets like, say, this one here at Fox News were reporting that church attendance was back to normal. So this didn't last forever. And that told me something. The fact that we at a time when we were searching for answers, we run to church, and then once it settles down and we feel like we're back in control again, our lives return to normal, we're back in control, we start to walk away, and now you see the continuing decline of whether or not religion matters. And that's what's interesting about 9/11. It actually reveals the relationship between religiosity and autonomy. The more you think that you have all the answers, the less likely you are to turn to anyone else for answers, including your pastor, your rabbi, a priest, imam, whoever it may be. You think you have the answers, you don't need to go to them. So if you think you're not going, there's no point in even studying if you think you have all the answers. There's no point in listening if you think you have all the answers. And this is why it's even harder to preach the gospel, for example, or to make proclamations about why your religious view matters. This happens. The minute that you are autonomous, the minute you think that life is great and you got it all in control, you could buy anything you want. People who are in that position, they are much less likely to turn to God. And this is why sometimes God removes all those things from you, because he's really trying to get your attention. You don't sometimes look up until you're at the bottom and you have a place. The only place you can look is up. So I think a lot of this comes down to our autonomy. We'll take a break, and when we come back, I want to just talk about the other type of autonomy. There's two kinds. The first one is informational autonomy. But there's another type of autonomy that I think also leads to our rejecting or seeing less and less value in religion. Now let's talk about a second kind of autonomy. By the way, autonomy is only exacerbated by the internet. Right? We're in the information age. And the more information you have, the more self-reliant you can be. I'll give you an example of this. When's the last time that you went to a doctor when you didn't already kind of self-diagnose yourself online with information? A lot of us will I don't even need to call the doctor. I already know what I have because I took care of it myself. I took care of myself in the privacy of my own home. When and how I didn't even need to go through the process of talking to somebody at the front office, of scheduling an appointment, of walking in and having to deal with the receptionist and the nurse and get weighed and all. No, forget that. I needed to get this information. I got it all on my own. I don't need that. Oh. You're autonomous. You're not reliant on this other. I was looking at a site the other day where I could get my glasses prescribed and fitted on my face without having to go to optometrist. Think about that. Really? It's not just that we can get what we want, it's that we can get it how and when we want it. Think about cable TV. Right, we all had cable TV growing up, or you had network TV if you're old like me, okay? And you had to wait for that show to come along, and if you missed it, it was on that schedule. You weren't going to see it again for 26 weeks when it was in reruns, right? But now, of course, everything is available on demand. I think it's killing cable too. So it used to be, for example, if ID Network was in your cable platform, you either had to DVR the show or you had to wait until it came on because it was playing at certain times. Well, now you can go to Discovery Plus and just watch the ID show on demand the way you want it. Do you see how the internet age in which we live is increasing our autonomy? And of course, the more self-reliant we become, the less reliant we will be on other sources of information, support, comfort. The things that we used to find in our religious community, and by the way, you think this wasn't exacerbated by the coronavirus year of the pandemic, where those communities didn't even meet? Some of those communities didn't even meet for months at a time, just increasing your sense of autonomy. Oh, I don't even need to leave the house or get dressed for church because it's streaming. This is only exacerbating the autonomy and continuing to minimize the sense that religion matters. No, religion is just another thing I can watch on my platform. It's another thing I can watch online. It's another entertainment option. Well, no kidding then, if that's the case. So informational autonomy is really at the root of a lot of why we don't think religion matters. But there's another aspect of this too, and that is the rise of moral autonomy. And moral autonomy is maybe even a bigger threat. Now, it's hidden again in that article we've been referring to, the Gallup poll, okay? And it's hidden in here, but I wanted you to see why I'm even bringing it up, because it's just as informational autonomy as they were charting the importance after 9/11. Also, clearly, there's a need there for a short season. Moral autonomy is also hinted at in the Gallup poll. Let me show it to you. For the first time in more than 6 decades, it said less than half of Americans 46% would say religion can answer all or most of today's problems. The public is now more closely divided than ever before in its view of religion as the answer to what ails society. And most of these are moral claims, questions about moral behaviors, like should we do this or should we do that? Or is this still good? Is that now bad? These are questions that are less and less, fewer and fewer Americans anyway, are turning to religion to get those answers. And that's in large part because we think that we are independent and that our views, that all moral truths are subjective. And there's the real problem. In the article, I've linked to a Barna survey that demonstrates this, and here's what it's called. It's actually called Barna survey says, "Goodbye absolutes, hello new morality." And this was a survey of about 1,000 participants around the nation. And what it really basically says is enlightening, but you already know it because you've already probably raising your kids, you've already seen this in your workplace, you've already seen this in your neighborhood, and you've certainly seen it if you're watching the news. And that is that we all now have a sense that you have your truth and I have my truth. And that includes moral truths. You have what you think is morally virtuous or vile. I have what I think is morally virtuous and vile. And these moral truths are innately personal. So that survey I showed you, article talking about Barna survey, it said this: according to the majority of Americans, now 57% now, this is growing, this number is growing, it's not going down, it's growing. According to a majority of American adults, knowing what is right or wrong is a matter of what? Of personal experience. Oh, I can tell you, I just had an episode this last week where someone made the claim that whatever you think is right or wrong as a Christian does not measure up to what I know is right or wrong based on my personal experience. Experience trumps hard facts, objective facts. There are no even math, people would argue now, is a result of the experience of certain groups that now leverage that as power over other groups. Look, is that the case for moral truths? Are all moral truths just a matter of personal opinion? If that's the case, how do I adjudicate between two people who hold to two different views on any moral claim? Unless you're willing to say one of those two persons is less a person than the other, you are not going to be able to reasonably say that their personal view is less than the other's personal view. Do you see the problem with this approach? Is that means that if everything is right, then nothing is right. It's what it means. So we're at a place then where we have to say, okay, well then everything's right. Because nothing's really right or wrong. It's all just a matter of personal opinion, and every person is different. And if it's a matter of groupthink, if it's a matter of cultures, these are still subjective. There's a larger group of subjects. So you're still going to be stuck with the same problem. How do two cultures that disagree about a vile activity, and one says it's okay and one says it isn't, how would you adjudicate between those two? What is the overarching, transcendent lawgiver that is the grounding for moral law? Because if it's just groups or individuals, we are in big trouble. And by the way, I think Gen Z is struggling with this far more than people in my age. Gen Z being those people who are between, like, say, 3 or 4 and maybe 20, right? The high schoolers for sure are Gen Z. There's a report that came out from Barna also a couple of years ago. It's this Gen Z and morality, what teens believe so far. And it's enlightening because it shows you that this confusion over how we ground moral truth claims is far more dramatic in young people than it is in boomers. So, for example, this is what this survey shows. It shows that a study of Gen Z Americans, that's age, they're saying 13 to 18, that's a little broader than that, but regardless, teens, are more than twice as likely to, quote, believe what is morally right and wrong changes over time based on society, unquote, than boomers. And remember, if societies, groups of subjects, decide what's right and wrong, that means that moral truths are still subjective. Just that there's more subjects than just one subject, there's a group of subjects. And there's the problem. Remember, after Nuremberg, The war criminals who were brought to trial, those people who worked at the prison camps, when they offered as their defense that, hey, in our society, at the time we were raised in this society, this was being taught as a moral good. And so I simply obeyed the values of my moral society. They taught this. These were their moral values. And what am I going to do? I adopted their moral. Just because you conquered us, just because you win the war and you've got a different set of moral values, does not mean now you can come along and execute me. I was actually a great a law-abiding citizen who was promoted for espousing those virtues that you now want to execute me for. Then, of course, that tribunal, right, of judges from Russia and England and America, Jackson was ours from America. He did not say, okay, well, then you're off the hook because you were just doing what your culture said it was okay to do. No, he believed there was an objective, transcendent truth about that behavior that transcended both Russia, America, England, and Germany. And so they were executed on the basis of the existence of an objective standard of moral behavior. So in the end, if we think that we are morally autonomous, then why would we ever need to bend our knee to what some old religion says? It is the rise of informational autonomy and moral autonomy that basically leads us to cast. And by the way, don't think for a second that smart people aren't involved in both of these forms of autonomy. And I think the more you are saturated in the information age, and the more you're thinking you're the source of all truth, and the more you're thinking you are not relying on anybody else, you might be super smart, but it's not your smarts per se, your ability to comprehend truth, that is leading you away from the faith. It is in fact just your growing arrogance, pride, and autonomy that is leading you to reject the faith, because any faith system will be a system that requires you to submit what you think is true for what God says is true, given that the gap between you and God is tremendous. Much greater, by the way, than what your professor and you were a student. Much greater, by the way, than you and any person you might think you're smarter than. The gap between God and you, God and us, is huge. If there is a God, we're going to have to submit to what that God says, given that if he's all-powerful, he would also be all-knowing. He has the power to eliminate imperfections, informational imperfections, moral imperfections. That kind of power leads you to a God who really is, the gap between him and us is so dramatic. You'd have to at least bend your knee to that God in terms of information, reliance, autonomy. You'd have to bend, you have to kind of submit those things to him. And of course, in a generation that's influenced by the internet, it's going to be harder and harder to do that. Hope this has been helpful for you as you think through why we are less likely to think religion matters as a culture going forward, so you can protect your own thinking on this and the thinking of your kids. I'll see you next week right here at Cold Case Christianity.